Greetings! We're excited to have you back for another episode of Alien Kontakt. As previously mentioned, today we're diving into part 2 of our discussion with Steve Aspin, focusing on implants and his extensive research on the subject. I promise you it will be very interesting. And make sure to stay tuned. Right after the intro we will continue.
You really want contact? Think about it.
Hello, dear ones! As promised, today comes the second part. Dear Steve, first of all, welcome to part 2 of the conversation. Please kindly introduce yourself again for those who are not yet acquainted with you.
This is my second interview with Alien Kontakt. I spoke with Alexandra a few weeks ago, and that interview, that session we had is posted online. So this will be the second part of it. And today we'll be talking about alien implants and some of the forensic evidence to support the reality of this phenomenon, which has been a subject of my research for several years now.
I sincerely appreciate your kind introduction, dear Steve, and I'm eager to proceed directly to the fascinating subject of implants. In your book Out of Time, this topic is explored comprehensively in Chapter 4, which I read thoroughly. I find it incredibly fascinating, and there are numerous medical insights as well. Various elements you incorporated into the research along with your own personal experiences. Maybe you can tell us something about your personal experience, how it started, why you started this research with implants in the first place.
When I was in the early times, I've been with my wife since 2008. And we'd just been together for a few weeks, and I got out of the shower, and she pointed at something on my shoulder, said, "Steve, that's one of those scoop marks I've seen in books about alien abductions, and you've got one." And she photographed it, because you can't see your shoulder behind you just can't see it because your eyes are in the wrong place. And I could barely see it in the mirror because it's of its position. So she photographed it, and we sent the photographs to some people we had both met and linked up with in the United States. And the photograph of this scoop mark scar ended up with Bud Hopkins, who at the time had been not in the best of health. He had kidney cancer, and then he had lymphoma, and so he wasn't doing any public meetings or public lectures. But he had a film company in Manhattan who was making a film about his work, and Bud was partnered with Leslie Kane. That was his life partner, and she was also the subject of this documentary. So there was work of Bud and Leslie, who were interacting with the phenomenon in slightly different ways, with slightly different emphases of what they were researching. And the film company was called Breakthrough, and they were based in Lower Manhattan. And they just happened to want to find a couple of original scoop mark scars which had never been in the public domain and had never been investigated. Bud invited me over to Manhattan to stay at his place in December 2008. And he met us at the airport with a film crew. And we went to his place in West 16th Street in Manhattan. He doesn't live there anymore because he passed away. But on the 11th of December 2008, we were taken by Breakthrough Films in a taxi to a dermatological clinic in Midtown Manhattan, where this scoop mark scar on my shoulder was biopsied and filmed being biopsied. and it was submitted for forensic analysis to a dermatological lab. And they sent this report of this scoop mark scar, and it was apparently the technical term for this medical phenomenon is a dermatofibrona, which is basically, it means a chunk taken out of the skin, which is usually very large insects, like a tropical insect that bites somebody and leaves a permanent mark, and it takes enough flesh away. But the dermatologist said he'd never seen one this large, and he'd never seen one this symmetrical, and he was very mystified by it. And he also said he'd never seen any dermatofibrona on any patient where the patient didn't remember how he acquired it, because usually you get bitten by an insect, it's really painful. And so the summary of this report of this dermatofibrona is in the book Out of Time. And interestingly, many years later, I was having lunch with Whitley Strieber when he came to the UK, and I met him in October 23. And we were talking, interesting little detail. He insisted that we turn our cell phones off, and he insisted that we put them in a bag that was not physically next to us. It's about 3 or 4 meters away. We could still see them on the coat rack, because he didn't want any possibility of us being recorded. And he said, he and I discussed these scoop mark scars. And one of the interesting things I'd learned that was that these implants that some abductees find in their ears or in this part of the nose, the olfactory, the olfactory nerve goes into the brain, or sometimes in their extremities, the different parts of the body, there's never any normal inflammatory response from the body's immune system to these things. And Whitley speculated that maybe he thought the genetic material from the scoop mark, but which they took quite a bit of tissue, like they a chunk out of the skin, is this genetic material is somehow synthesized by some PCR technique, whereby they can engineer this genetic formulation into the outside of this implant, this tiny little implant that they put into the individual abductee. So the abductee's immune system does not recognize it as a foreign object. They recognize it, they'll recognize something, their own tissue, and they just think it's part of the body. Mm. And I thought that was very interesting. And I speculate about how they might do this in the book as well. So that's all came from this original biopsy in Manhattan.
It was also the case with me that I had a lot of nosebleeds ever since I was a child, and didn't want to be looked into my nose. And the doctor who looked into my nose and wanted to find out why I had so much nosebleeds always told me not to stick it so deep into my nose. But it never was. I never had it examined or x-rayed, or how should I say MRI, because I didn't want to do that. I notice now sometimes today, like these muggalons, that they move like that. Like that, sometimes I also feel that something is moving, and then, after that, I also have out-of-body experience.
I had an experience in 2022 when I was writing Out of Time. That's when I was... I had a cold, so I was kind of sneezing, and there's something moved up here when I was sneezing, and I snorted it down. I just thought it was like, slime. I snorted it down and kind of swallowed it. And then about 2 minutes later, I just coughed up really gently like that. And this blood clot came and into the wash basin.
Hast du es verstanden, Alexandra? Okay.
Yeah, my blood clot. And I was overtaken by panic, and I wanted to wash it down the wash basin, down the drain. So I used much more water than you would normally to wash it away. And it just occurred to me that now my nose kept bleeding for 24 hours. Okay, and after 2 hours, the blood flow wasn't very great. It was just very occasional, but it didn't really stop for 24 hours. And it was only the next. This sounds incredibly stupid, incredibly dull-witted. I just thought the next day that was an implant that I coughed out. And the way I justified my reaction to it was, if my wife, who's prone to worry about things, sees that I'm coughing up blood, she'll have me straight down the emergency room. And I actually didn't think that I needed to go there. I just thought I'd make sure she didn't see it. And that's my rationale for washing it down with a lot of water. But it was just the next day I thought, that was an implant I coughed up, and it's in the septic tank, and we can't analyze it now because it's gone. And about 6 weeks later, this is in February 2022, about 6 weeks later in April, I'm pretty sure they put it back, because I woke up feeling angry and irritable, and my nose was bleeding again, and it was hurting. And it took all day to settle down. And I think they put another one back in. And what I discovered about these implants is that they transmit radio waves in 3 separate frequencies in about 8 hertz, 14 megahertz, and 19 gigahertz ranges, all simultaneously. And when you remove them from the body, because was a surgeon called Dr. Roger Lear, who was working in Southern California, removed 20 of these things over 19 years from patients. And he discovered that you could measure these radio waves when the implant was removed. And it's about 4 weeks in, or 5 or 6 weeks, you could still, the thing was still radiating in these 3 frequency bands, and then it just stopped. That means that whoever is receiving the signals would know that the object had been taken out, because they were engineered to stop transmitting. Maybe they were using the electrical energy of the body or something for the power source. But once they've been removed, Lear noticed that after a few weeks they stopped transmitting, and that would alert the abductors that they needed to replace it. I mean, this is speculation, but it fits all the facts. I think that's what's going on.
Why do you really think this? Do these scars naturally occur? Alternatively, yes, implant. That's why I always suggest putting scars or features prominently visible, where you can't see them.
Because they don't want you to find them. They know where our eyes are, and they don't want us to see them. They don't want us to find them. I mean, that's obvious. It would seem obvious. And also, if it's on the face, everybody would see them. But they know that if it's on the back of your shoulder or the back, or because we wear clothes and so forth, or the part of the body that you never can get to look at, you won't notice them. I mean, I've got one on the back of my knee, which we only found when we really started looking for them, and I don't know what its vintage is. I don't know how long it's been there, but it's as big as the one on the shoulder, and it's harder to see because it's in the crook of the knee, at the back of the knee. And I've got quite hairy legs, so it's really, really hard to see. But if you're looking for it, it's really obvious. Once you can see it, it's really obvious. So I didn't find that one for years because I wasn't looking for it, and I don't look at the back of my knees that often.
What findings from the detailed dermatological examination conducted by Dr. Casimir do you think are especially noteworthy? And what makes these scars distinct from typical injuries?
The only comparison that the dermatological medical community has is when somebody gets bitten by an insect, the insect takes a chunk out of you. I mean, some tropical insects can bite quite viciously, but they're not as big as these scoop marks from alien abductees. And they've got that. If you've got an image you can show, Alexei, that will show the symmetry of these scoop marks. They're kind of oval shapes. They're not completely round always, and they have a ridge across the middle, which means that they've been cut with a tool which comes together in the middle. And this ridge is abductees come back from abduction events with these scoop marks completely healed. There's no pain. There's no sign of bleeding. It looks like they've been there for weeks or months, but they've just, 2 hours earlier they weren't there. So they come back from an abduction event with these scoop mark scars, and they're completely healed. So they have some kind of technology or technique which can accelerate tissue healing. I don't know how it's done, because I have no clear memory of such a procedure. But the abductees always say that it's completely healed when they come back from an abduction event. So they have quite sophisticated surgical techniques, and a lot of the procedures they do, they don't leave any traces afterwards, or minimal traces. This can be the forensic traces, like from the scoop marks or the marks on the arm, but there's never any pain and there's never any bleeding subsequently. So the healing is very rapid. The scoop marks are very common with abductees, although they don't take tissue from these very often. In a lifetime, they maybe take 3 or 4 samples over like 40 or 50 years. And so that they have a record of the tissue type and the record of the genetic, the DNA composition, and and they manage to somehow replicate, and I think one of the things we have an analysis in the book, in one of the appendices, of an implant that was removed from a patient in Southern California and was analyzed by the managing director, the president of this company is called Steve Colburn. He's a forensic scientist and a forensic microscopist. And the company is called Dark Star Nanotechnology, or Neutron Star Nanotechnology. It's called Neutron Star Nanotechnology. And this thing has a shell. They're tiny little things, about the size of smaller than a grain of wheat. They're really tiny. And this thing, if you look at it through an electron microscope, you can see that it has a shell woven of hemosiderin, protein coagulum, and keratin. Now, hemosiderin and protein coagulum, hemosiderin is to do with the blood clotting, and it works with the body's thrombocytes. And protein coagulum assists in tissue respiration, in the body's tissue respiration. Keratin, most people would know, is a substance that makes up hair and nails, things that grow through the skin, like the hair and nails. It's keratin. And there's no reason for such a substance to be deep inside the body, because you don't find keratin except in the epidermis. So they managed to engineer this hemosiderin, protein coagulum, and keratin shell in such a way that the body's immune system will not react to it. And the only way they can do that is for the body's immune system to recognize it as not a foreign object. In other words, the body's immune system needs to recognize it as its own tissue, as it says, recognizes as itself. So that tells you they must make the shells of these implants from the abductees' own body tissue in some way. And I think that's what the scoop marks, the tissue taken from these scoop marks, these little bites of tissue, that's what they're used for, to manufacture this genetic material. So the body will not recognize it as foreign. Because if you get a splinter of wood in your hand, as an example, if you're chopping wood or some other foreign object, and if it goes into your tissue, what happens is your body reacts, your immune system reacts to it, and you get soreness and redness and swelling. And it's called, this is a normal immune response reaction to a foreign object in the body. And this never happens with these implants. It never happens. You never get big inflammation at the site. They're just accepted by the body, apparently. So they have to engineer them in that way. They have to have the body's own DNA, their body's own tissue as a model. Then they manage to engineer that.
How do you explain the fact that the implants, for example, stop their radio wave emission? You explained that as soon as you take them out of the body. After a few weeks, they are dead, so to speak, and then no longer react as soon as they are removed from the body. How do you explain this, or do you have an explanation for it?
We have to speculate about this. I suspect that the object itself is taking its energy from the body's own energy, the body's own electricals, the nervous system, the body's got little electrical impulses that run through the brain and the nervous system. And the body's got a life, other than the physical. There's electrical energy in the body. I suspect that these implants are engineered in such a way that that's the energy source they draw from. And once they're removed from the body, that energy source runs out, runs down, and they stop. And, one of the byproducts of that is the abductors will know that this thing has been removed because it stops transmitting. Yeah. I mean, Roger Lear said the maximum time that one of these implants that he removed was transmitting when it was removed from the body was 90 days, more often 60 days and often less. So they have a slightly indeterminate lifespan once they're removed from the body, but within 90 days, they've all stopped transmitting.
What do you think? What is the significance of the fact that the chemical composition of the implants partly even matches meteorites?
That's a very good question. Because the analyses of these objects demonstrate that inside the shell, there are various tiny trace elements of very often quite precious metals like iridium, gold, platinum, which are very rare on Earth, and also more common elements like cadmium and so forth, which is can be toxic in very large quantities. So what happens with a normal molecule of gold, as an example? It has a certain number of. I'm not a chemist, but any metal would have a certain number of protons and electrons, protons in its nucleus, and it also has neutrons in its nucleus, which are not the same number as the number of protons. So the number of neutrons in the nucleus gives the thing its atomic weight. And as an example, we talk about carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14. and carbon-14 is a slightly heavier element with a slightly higher atomic weight than carbon-12. And this is naturally unstable, and you can measure how old something is by the rate at which the carbon-14 has stabilized. In other words, it's lost neutrons and the atomic weight is less. Now, these implants, they have non-terrestrial isotopes. So the atomic weight of the gold, of the platinum, of the iridium, of these exotic metals, the iron in particular, the atomic weight is non-terrestrial. They have, as an example, the iron would have a heavier atomic weight than terrestrial iron. And the only place you would find that iron on Earth anywhere is iron that's been recovered from iron-nickel meteorites. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the implant is from an iron-nickel meteorite, but it means it originates from outside the Earth, because the isotopic value is different to terrestrial iron. So it tells us pretty unequivocally that what ingredients are in these implants have a non-terrestrial origin. In fact, one scientist has speculated that the atomic weight of some of these isotopes is such that they would only originate in the center of the galaxy, where supernovae are much more common. So that would give produce different isotopic values, because the way that a matter behaves in those circumstances is different. So we know that the components of these implants are non-terrestrial without any question. I mean, there are so many examples of that. And it's a pretty remarkable fact, when you confront the science of it, that is the case.
What would also interest me would be, do you think that in addition to monitoring, or should I say communication with us? So I also refer to implants, although my guess is that we all have implants. Do you think there are other functions? Or have you perhaps found out in your research that these implants also have other functions?
That's a very difficult question. I think we have to enter into the realm of speculation here, because nobody really knows, and can't really prove anything. Colburn thinks that the ones he has analyzed, they might be to do with one or two of them at least might be to do with mood regulation and hormone regulation. And I don't understand the science very, very well, but that's a conclusion he's come to. It's possible that they do a variety of different things, possibly all at the same time. What the information they're transmitting in these three frequency bands could cover a whole spectrum of things. And I think the early days, people speculated that they were probably location devices, but I think that's too simplistic. They're for more sophisticated things in addition to location devices. That means that the abductee can be found anywhere on Earth if they want to find you. But I'm not sure that's the only function, if it is a function at all, of these implants. So I suspect there are different reasons for them, and they're placed in abductees for different purposes. So that doesn't really answer the question, does it? Yeah. but just that I think this question is very difficult to answer definitively, but I suspect that it's more complicated than we appreciate it is. Yeah, but they're therefore certainly complicated procedures. Yeah, complicated the things that they're measuring.
Now we have reached what I believe is the most fascinating question. It's regarding the discovered hair that you found. Could you perhaps elaborate on where it was found, how it was examined, and the conclusions you reached?
Yeah, I introduced the whole subject by summarising the Peter Corey case from Australia in 1992, when he encountered two exotic beings in the daytime, in the morning, in the house where he was recovering from a physical assault. So he was in bed, but he was all alone because his wife was out working. And he encountered two naked female figures, which one of them was more than 2 meters tall, he estimates. And they didn't look identical. One looked like Asiatic looking, and the other one was blonde and Nordic looking. They left two hairs around a part of his male anatomy, and he'd put them in a Ziploc bag and left them in a drawer for 9 years, or 7 years or 9 years, until he eventually remembered them. And he approached a UFO researcher called Bill Chalker, an Australian a ufologist, who took these hairs and had them analyzed in a laboratory. And he discovered that they were quite exotic, that they had characteristics that part of the hair length of the hair root, length of the hair shaft was Asiatic in origin, and the part of the hair shaft was Basque in origin, which is a particular genetic type from the northern Spain. And also the DNA was configured in such a way that the beings would probably have been immune to catching diseases like HIV and smallpox. And I go into the science a little bit in the book, but I won't repeat it here because it's not pertinent to the main part of this narrative. In 2015, I was in my Hertfordshire house, and my wife was gone to bed. It was about 11 o'clock in the evening. She'd gone to bed, and I was reading something, sitting by the fire, and I was overcome by drowsiness, extreme drowsiness. And I recognize that as sometimes, they have come to visit, because you have a very, very euphoric feeling, and you just want to lie your head back and drift off to sleep. And you wake up like an hour or 2 hours later, and you feel irritated and annoyed, and you get up and stretch, and you go off to bed and sleep. I had this overpowering drowsiness, and I forced myself to stay awake, and force myself. And I saw two beings enter the room. And this sounds fantastical to anyone who doesn't know this subject. Through the glass of we had some glass doors into the garden, double glazed glass doors in the garden, the full length glass doors. And there were the whole structure was maybe 2 meters square, so 2 meters across and 2 meters deep. And they walked right through that, and they came into the room. And one being was is female, and she was about 150 or 160 high, not very tall, and she had kind of tangled, not very well kept grayish silver hair, and she had a single garment on, where the sleeves came down to about there. And the garment was loose. And another being with her looked like a man you could see in the street in the town centre on the Saturday afternoon. He was just wearing Western clothes and ordinary shoes, and he looked like an 18-year-old from, Mannheim or Berlin on a Saturday evening. He was beside her, but she was the one walking slightly ahead, and I was overcome by the drowsiness and was knocked out. And the following morning, my wife found underneath the dining room table that we kept the house very clean, very spotless, and we just cleaned up very thoroughly that particular day. And there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere, in that part of the house. And she found a hair about 30 centimeters, maybe 25 centimeters long, very light colored. And we couldn't decide whether it was gray or blonde. We thought it was blonde, but it was underneath the dining table on a rug underneath the dining table. And later the same day, she found an identical hair just into the garden on the patio, just outside the double doors, which were shut and locked all night. And there's this, so we put the hairs together, and we could see they're exactly the same length, the same color, the same hair, and completely. And we kept them in a Ziploc bag, and she insisted that I not know where they were. People who are in and it has studied this phenomenon will understand the reasons for that. They can read your mind, and if they've left any evidence of their visits behind, they want to know where it is. And so she hid them in a place where I wouldn't know where to find them. And we spent a year trying to find a laboratory who would investigate them and give us a forensic analysis. And finally, a researcher called David Jacobs from Temple University had another hair from an abductee in California. And this abductee claimed she remembered exactly how and when it was acquired, because she found it inside her nightdress, this abductee, or she found it attached to her clothing. And she remembered exactly. She remembered a hybrid being leaning over her, and while she was on board, and dropping this hair, her hair came over her head like that, because of her position, leaning over her. And she knew exactly where she acquired the hair. So we found a pair of microscopists, forensic microscopists at Microtrace LLC in Illinois, who were prepared to investigate these hairs. So we had two hairs from my house, and we had this one hair from this abductee in California, who I didn't know. I've never met her even to this day. I don't know who she is. But they analyzed them together because it was like what they saw as one job. And the report that came back was that the hair from this abductee in California was a polypropylene hair from a costume wig. Now, it's a very dark color, dark brown. They said it was made from a costume wig. And the hairs from our house were also from a wig, but they were human hairs, and they were bleached prior to dying, prior to being dyed. So they bleached the hair of its original color, and then you can dye the wig whatever color you like. But somehow this being had got hold of this wig prior to it being dyed, but after it was bleached, and she'd worn it when she visited us in our house, and she dropped two hairs because the hairs were obviously not very well attached, she brushed against something. So all the hairs investigated from these two locations by the Microtrace LLC were from wigs. Now, I've met one or two other abductees since then, and we don't really talk about the wig aspect that much. But one of them said to me, what is it with hybrids and wigs? They often wear wigs. Why do they do that? So he knew by reputation, and I don't know anyone else who knows this, by reputation or experience that the hybrids seem to wear wigs. Sometimes you can just tell, when you're looking at them, the thing doesn't fit right, or it just doesn't look like natural hair, or they don't look after it. It looks like very messy. But hybrid beings or transgenic beings, whatever they are, part of the alien project, they often wear wigs. And I think it's the middle stage hybrids that don't have any natural hair themselves. The female ones don't want to stand out. They want to pass in human society temporarily if they need to, or make the abductee feel that they're a bit more human, or they shouldn't be scared of them, something. But we have the forensic evidence that they have wigs. They wear wigs. We still have one of these hairs in the house here, in a secure location. But it's not exotic. It's a wig made by the human world, by the theatrical industry, the theatrical industry, the wig makers. That's what it is.
What are the numerous measures we can potentially take to dispel any lingering doubts? Additionally, how can you thoroughly convince skeptics?
This is a $1 million question. It's a $64 million question. I think the starting point has to be that the person has to have an actual curiosity about it and not be prepared to just dismiss it and say, oh, it's rubbish, and be closed-minded. Person has to have some natural curiosity about it, and that will open up the world for them. I mean, people like Gary Nolan and Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan in San Francisco. Is it San Francisco, Los Angeles? Nolan, I think it's San Francisco. Avi Loeb is at Harvard. He's a Harvard astronomer or a Harvard cosmologist, and there's a couple of other people over there have very highly credentialed people. Even Michio Kaku is very open-minded about the whole UAP issue, but I don't really know whether they go near the abduction stuff, because they think it's rather controversial and potentially terrifying to bring it into the public domain too much. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's not encouraged to be brought into the public domain. So about the question, you can't convert somebody from Bud Hopkins once explained to me, in all the time he dealt with debunkers and so forth, and all the time all the panel shows he'd been on, all the TV debates he'd been on, he said basically, there are 4 types of people who engage with this phenomenon. One is the skeptical, genuinely skeptical people will be open-minded about it, and they'll follow the evidence. And they're relatively rare, but they're very valuable, because they tend to be quite well grounded, and they tend not to be fooled by hoaxes and fooled by BS. And another type is New Agers, who tend to think that it's all they're all people from the stars who are trying to upgrade us and trying to completely benign and trying to encourage us to get on board with the ecological program, and they want to enhance us and take us to the next level of being and so forth. And basically all that narrative is fairly widespread. And then you have what he called the true believers, which these people would just know that the whole subject is rubbish, and they'll spend all their lives trying to debunk it and trying to demonstrate that this is a hoax and that that doesn't stand up, and this is a complete fraud, and so forth. And he characterized these people as being, he said, they believe that UFOs are not real with the same religious fervor with which the Pope believes in the virgin birth. That is because it's an ideological construct from the brain. They're absolutely ideological about this. This cannot be real. Abductions can't be real. They just can't. So that it can't be. So it isn't. And the final group of people, he said, he referred to as basically being curious. And that's a very large group of people. They really don't have any interest in the subject, and they just say, yeah, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't care. They have their own preoccupations. They're interested in sport, or they're interested in their families, or politics, or the arts, or they engage with things at a different level, but they have no interest in this subject, and you can't persuade them to take any interest in it beyond what they have, which is almost nothing. So it depends on the psychological makeup and commitments of the person, of the skeptic, the so-called skeptic, as to whether you can make any headway with them. And fundamentally, the person themselves has to himself or herself has to have an interest, has to engage.
We conclude the conversation today. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to you, dear Steve, for generously sharing your valuable time with us. As we approach the end of this discussion, perhaps you have some final thoughts to impart, particularly concerning implants and the significant findings of your research.
People will make up their own minds about this, but to me, it's the forensic science, because this is what my next book will be, full of forensic science, and it will be a PhD cellular biologist will be my co-author. So if people are not persuaded by hard forensic science and that kind of evidence, they'll never be persuaded by anything. And thank you, Alexandros, for inviting me on. It's really great to spend time with you like this. We had I think, a really good discussion. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything, and I look forward to our next meeting. Goodbye, dear friend.